G'day ladies and gentlemen, ScottyD here from the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome into our next installment in our series, From Sprue to Tabletop. Alrighty ladies and gentlemen, so for our next installment in our From Sprue to Tabletop series, we're going to look at something that a lot of people have been talking to me about in our Twitch chat, and also through friends and such as well, that they would love to see a tutorial on something that I'm well versed in. And so this video is actually going to be Magnetizing 101. So we're going to be looking at magnetizing. We're going to be looking at how to use magnets, the process that I follow when I'm magnetizing my miniatures, and what aspects this has to your hobby, the pros of it, the cons of it, and, you know, how to go about doing it in a really simple and easy way. But before we jump into looking at what's going to be involved, what you're going to need, all this kind of stuff, I want to thank everyone who has been joining us over here on the YouTube channel as of late. I really appreciate your support, enjoying the tournament coverage that we've done of Extermin Artists, as well as the upcoming coverage we're going to be doing of Adelaide Uprising, which is going to be exciting next weekend across the Australia Day long weekend. So super looking forward to that as well. So for magnetizing, we're going to look at the tools that you're going to need, how I go about personally magnetizing, and why I do it the way that I do it, as well as the way that you're going to want to keep your magnetizing consistent without mixing up polarities when you are doing multiple miniatures and such as well. So we're just going to jump straight on into actually doing some live magnetizing. We're going to jump to the hobby desk. We're going to be magnetizing up a Deathwatch Lieutenant/Ancient, and we're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff. So we're going to jump over the hobby desk and start the actual tutorial part of this video. Alrighty, everyone. So we're going to be jumping into looking at how to go about magnetizing a model. And now we've actually got the basis of a Deathwatch Marine here that I'm going to be looking to build up as Lieutenant/Ancient. For my Deathwatch Marines, yes, he is on a 32mm base. That's because he's a firstborn version, so we're just going to keep that in line there. So I have got the legs assembled, we've got the torso glued on, the helmet glued into position for where we want it, and some little additional details here that we have already put in the right spot for some of the parts we're going to magnetize later on in this video. So when you come in to magnetize, this is kind of where, at least for Marines, this is your minimum starting point. And I would always recommend that you don't actually have the backpack on, because if you put the backpack on, it means that you're not going to be able to navigate the shoulder pads as well, or glue them onto the actual arms after you've done the magnetizing of the shoulders themselves and such. So it's easier to leave that off at this stage. But before we jump into actually magnetizing this model, I want to run through the different tools you're going to need. So you're going to need some paper towel to be handy. You're going to need super glue. Now, I am using Zap-A-Gap. It is quite... it's a lot better than the Army Painter one that I've previously used. However, if you are using Army Painter super glue, that one works fine too. Wouldn't recommend Games Workshop super glue at this stage. I'd recommend you have at least a round file and a flat file handy to be able to be used. 1 or 2 different pin vices. Now, the reason why I've got 2 is each of them have already got preset 2 different size drill bits that we're going to need. You want probably a smaller one, and then the larger one that you want, you actually want it to match the size of the magnets. So right there, you can see that it's just a little bit bigger, or just about the size of the magnets we're going to be using to magnetize this Marine. So it means that this drill bit is perfect for making those holes. You're going to need some blue tack if you want to do some dry fitting, which I'm going to show you how to do when we get into actually aligning the model and seeing how things fit together. You're going to want 2 different hobby knives. Doesn't matter which hobby knives we've got. I've got an older Games Workshop style one that I use for using with the magnets. And then I've got an even older version of a Games Workshop one, which is my primary one, which is what I actually use for cleaning. So I've actually just been working on tidying up this little section on the side here as well, just making sure that that's all good to go with this hobby knife. So, and then obviously you're going to need your magnets. Now we're going to be working with 2mm by 1mm magnets for this guy. Generally for Marine size models, you know, you could do 3mm by 1mm, but 2mm by 1mm. So when I talk about that, It's 2 millimeters in diameter and 1 millimeter in thickness. So that's just what you would be looking for when you are looking to work with Marines. Now, normally, if you're doing this as your first magnetizing effort, you don't need to worry about this step as much. For the subsequent models after that, you definitely will. But I'm going to walk through my process when it comes to actually magnetizing miniatures, already using the same polarity that I've got across my Deathwatch and my Space Marines. And the way that I do that is I've actually got a Marine here that I use for undercoating or priming magnetized pieces. There's actually got a magnet in each shoulder and in the back where the backpack would go, so I can actually match the polarity of both shoulders, and if I'm doing the backpack as well, the backpack, so that it'll actually match across the rest of my army. Now, if you have got spare Marines like this, I highly recommend being able to do so. This is an older one that I've had for eons. Even if you've got like a spare torso, it doesn't need to be a full Marine, but a spare torso to do that with, that would be absolutely perfect to do that with. So then that way you can make sure that when you're doing the magnets in the arms, you can make sure that they're actually going to stick on the right shoulders and you're going to have the right polarity and such as well. The other thing I will use this miniature to show you is the way you want to have the polarity is you want to make sure the polarity is going one way, if at all possible. So if I was to grab this arm that's actually his right arm and try to put it on the left, it actually repulses and it actually is being pushed away rather than it wanting to connect. So that means that when you have all the different pieces you're wanting to magnetize, you're able to have them connecting one way, and you can have pieces that might go on a different arm, can't necessarily connect in the right way and look out of place. Now, the backpack, generally you want to have the same repulsion. So this being the left arm, it connects to the left, but you do not want this to be able to connect to the back or to the right arm. So that's the way you would do it. So you've got the same kind of flow direction for the magnets in the first place. So with that in mind, we're now going to jump into working on this guy and get him all magnetized. Now, the first step, and I'm just going to move some of these tools out of the way so I've got a bit more working space on camera. The first step is to grab your hobby knife, and we're going to start off with his left shoulder. We're actually going to find roughly the middle of where it is. So it's about there. And what we'll do is we'll actually just put a tiny hole in there. So then that way, when we go to put the drill bit into it, and we've actually got something that it's going to grab onto straight away rather than having to do it on the flat surface. We're going to do both sides when we come into this step. Now, you want it in the middle, and it might be a bit weaker because of the glue you're using. Obviously, we've used our good friend, the Revel Contactor Professional, best plastic cement that you could possibly get your hands on. And so that one's not necessarily as centered on Marines, particularly for the shoulders. It's not as pivotal for that. So we've got our holes in there. Now we want to grab the smaller pin vise with the smaller drill bit, and we just want to just very carefully drill our way through the shoulder pad. And yes, it is squeaking. If you can hear that on the video, I do apologize. And once that is through, you want to clean off the plastic, and you can see that we have now got a hole. That is your starting hole. You don't want to do too big of a hole initially, because what you might find then is that you actually tear off more plastic from the hole than you need. So we've done both shoulders. Now we're going to do the next size hole. So this is the just bigger than 2 millimeter hole. I think it's a 3/8 of an inch drill bit that I've got here. And so it's just going to grab in, and you want to put a light pressure on, and it will grab, and it will slowly get those chunks out of that hole. And we can clean that off. And we'll do the same on the other side. It just makes the process a little bit easier rather than jumping straight into doing it with the larger drill bit. with the experience I've had, I've done it with the larger drill bit straight off the bat, and I've had torsos rip in half from it. So I've always found it to be a lot easier when it comes to actually doing this step with it. Now, you'll see that there's some slight raised edges on the actual sides of the actual holes. So we'll just grab our hobby knife and just come in and just clean up around it, just to make sure that it's going to end up being nice and flat, if and where possible, throughout the entire process. And so once we've done both sides, we will then be able to get into kind of the initial actual posing stage of actually being able to be like, okay, what's going to go where and how are we going to actually do this? So we've got a couple of different options here, and this is where the blue tack comes in. We're going to grab a little bit of blue tack for each arm, and we've got a Xenophase blade here. The guy being a Deathwatch character is going to go on one end, and then you're going to grab a little bit more for the other with his Deathwatch bolter, and we're going to pop it down on the other. So you can kind of see roughly what he's actually going to be posing like. You can pop the backpack on. You could also blue tack that in, and then it gives you an opportunity to actually get the shoulder pad in place, just to kind of understand roughly where that is going to actually sit on the model, and see if it conflicts with the shoulder pad a little bit, which it will, with the backpack, sorry. So the shoulder pad will conflict with the backpack, but that's why we don't glue the shoulder pads or the backpack on, so that we actually get a little bit of dry fitting in there, and then we can pull these off. It's relatively well used blue tack as well, so it's not gonna stick too much to the actual model. We pull that off, put it back onto the entire blob, and put that over to the side. So now we've done that, we're good to start actually going about magnetizing. So we're going to grab the arms of each of the sides of this lone marine that we've been using. We're going to grab our stick of magnets, and we're going to grab one magnet for each arm. I'm just going to let it get its own polarity for each arm there. Okay. So from here, we know that when we go to put that in, it'll be the right polarity for that side, and then same for the other side as well. So we're going to grab our spare hobby knife. Generally, you want a dull blade on this because you're only splitting magnets. You're not wanting to actually carve anything. You want to split them between the two and come in and be able to pull it off. Now, you'll see how, if we put it back on, it decides it wants to stay with it. So by pulling that off, you're able to get it alone, but also then making sure that the side that isn't connected to the face of the blade is actually going to be the side that's going to be on the internal of the miniature. So now we're going to grab our super glue and just ever so slightly give it a little bit of pressure to allow it to come out. You don't need a whole lot of super glue when you're doing this either. So about that much, small dollop. And then by using the blade, you just want to make sure that you are pushing the magnet all the way through. And when you are doing these holes, you want to make sure they're deeper than what you need. Now, I'm not 100% satisfied with that being all the way in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the drill bit from the drill that I did for the bigger hole. I'm actually going to use it just to push it in ever so slightly, making sure that it's flush, or just a tad countersunk to the face of the actual shoulder. And that's in there nicely. And so we'll go about and we'll do that again for the other side as well. Now this one's a bit harder because the magnet itself is actually countersunk, but we can get the blade in there to get that out. And that one is relatively good. You can also do the additional countersinking with the blade, but you can see that I've just pushed that in a little bit too far. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and maybe pull it out a little bit, because you'll see that with that, it's a relatively weak grab, which is okay. It's not terrible, but we obviously don't want that if we can avoid it. But obviously you don't want to push it in that much. So you can look, it's a mistake-based process. Like, you can make mistakes with these like that and still get the results you want. So now definitely the left side is probably dried. And we'll be able to put that arm on there. That connects. Then we'll grab the other arm, and that can sit on there as well. And we can then grab a little bit of blue tack again. Just pop it on at the center of the backpack. And then we can just blue tack the backpack on. And we can see that we can put the arm in that position, and it sits nicely with the backpack as well. We're going to leave the backpack blue tacked on for a little bit, because we're also going to do the arms. Now, I'm going to put these two arms back onto this guy. I'm going to pop him off to the side for now. So now when it comes to doing your arms, sometimes you'll have holes like this that already exist. Sometimes they'll be completely flat. So what you want to have a look at is when you kind of do a dry fit, roughly where they sit. You kind of want to make a note of roughly the middle of where it's going to sit. Sometimes it is just going to be straight the middle of the shoulder pad, and sometimes it is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to do that first initial hole for the Xenophase blade onto there, and then we are going to do the next hole as well, just drilling that right the way in. Now, sometimes it'll be a bit difficult. You just need to really tighten up your blade, not your blade, your drill bit, and then because you can see how it's grabbed. And so that's what we want, but we don't want to grab too much of it. So we only grabbed a little bit there, but this is where it's always best to drill deeper than you think you're going to need to. So, because you don't want the magnet necessarily sticking out. And so I would say, once we clean out the rest of the shavings from this hole, that's actually plenty deep for what we are wanting to use there. So then we'll come in with our hobby knife and just clean it up a little bit, making sure that it's nice and ready to receive that magnet that we're going to use for that side. Now, we're also going to do the same over here. However, we don't actually need to do what we did for the Xenophase blade with the bolt gun. Because it's already got a hole in there, what we can do is just pop the actual large drill bit in there and kind of let it do the work in the direction we're wanting it to go. So now, what we can do with that is, because it's winded up at the full face, we can also clean it a bit that way, is that we can glue that magnet in. But the thing is, that hole is potentially going to be too big for a small 2mm magnet. And this is where we're probably going to want to see if a 3mm magnet is going to be handy. So it's always good to have the next size up available to you, just in case this does happen. Now, the hole is a little bit too small for a 3mm, but I'm pretty certain I do have a 3mm drill bit sitting in my hobby box that I can grab to make use of, which is this guy right here. And so it's too big to actually fit in the regular pin vise itself. So I'm just going to use my fingers here and just torque it so that it's going to clean through the actual section that we're wanting to with it. Now, it'll take some spins to cut through some of the more difficult areas as well. But once we get that done, we'll be able to see that, yep, that's big enough for a 3mm. These are 3mm by 1mm. So by just doing a test fit, it's pretty much the way there. We just might do it a little bit deeper with this one. And so ever so slightly, just finger torquing it again. Yep, that'll fit perfectly. So sometimes you will have to do that. So it's also recommended to have the larger size on hand. It's also not necessarily a problem with this one, because the right arm on this Marine has actually been countersunk in a little too far. So by having a stronger magnet, it's actually going to be very helpful for us. So now we're going to grab our Marine over once again without the actual arms on, and we're going to pop off a 3mm magnet for this side. And then we're going to grab our 2mm magnets that are just off to the side and pop it there as well. So we've got one for each side. Same process again. We're going to start with the 2mm. Make sure it's a tad countersunk. And we want to wipe off any excess super glue that pulls out of here. And so then that side is magnetized, good to go. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other side now. And that's relatively on the face, but it'll be enough to actually sit in there, and it'll have enough strength in the magnet to actually pull on to the marine. So now that we've done that, that's the basics of the magnetizing process, where you're getting the arms ready to go. So with this one, it's more than likely dry. We can actually pop it on. You'll see that sometimes it might not sit the best with the shoulder, or where it actually wants to sit, but this is actually sitting pretty well. That's the only downside with magnetizing, is you'll have potential gaps at the back of your marines in this instance. But now that we've actually got that in place, we can actually do the next dry fitting step, which is just to dry fit on the shoulder pad, and just grab a little bit of blue tack again. Try and, well, you can either try and get it into the actual shoulder pad itself, which that has just done, using the spare knife if you want to get it right in there. I'm going to pop off the shoulder pad just so we can get it, pop the backpack, sorry, get the shoulder pad in the right spot, and just blue tack it on, just so we can kind of see where that's going to connect, and then pop the backpack back on as well. And as you can see, where we're looking to glue that in is actually going to be the perfect spot for being used with the backpack. Obviously, we can move it up to be a bit higher, like so it's a bit more like that instead of being more towards the front like that. But you could also have it and just have a little bit of a gap at the back of the arm as well. The magnet will also hold it in place. So that's something to bear in mind. So now we are going to actually glue the shoulder pad on, and we're going to use our Revel glue here. Now the hard thing is going to be, because that glue over spilled, we can't necessarily attach it unless you wipe a little bit of it off. So we're just going to wipe it off. We'll let that dry, and then the other way you can also test it is by just making sure that it's going to test well here. Obviously, the shoulder pad's a bit high up. So if I was to then come in on this guy with it, sits up perfectly with that, or we can sit it forward a little bit, and you can see there's a gap there, but the shoulder pad is what's causing that because of how it's hitting here, and it's not necessarily hitting the backpack. That's just something to bear in mind as well. And we've got no plastic glue onto the back there. So that is one arm actually fully magnetized and ready to go. So now that we've got the bolt gun arm, we can pop the bolt gun arm on as well. Just have a little bit of a look. We've got a more traditional shoulder pad for this one. And so we're just going to pop it on there. It should sit nicely because of the position. I don't see a problem with this one and where it's going to be sitting. So we're going to just glue that one straight on. We don't need a whole heap of super glue for this one. Sorry, not super glue, plastic glue. And we are just going to pop that one straight in. It's not going to overflow, so we shouldn't have any issues. Just making sure that that's going to connect, and you can see it gets nice coverage across the entire model there. Or part of the model, I should say. And then just pop it down there. And with this guy drying as well, you can see that we have now got a fully, well, not fully magnetized, but we have got a magnetized marine in terms of the two arms and the shoulder pads as well.
Alrighty, everyone. So now that you've got the first miniature magnetized for your army, we're going to look at how you're actually able to set yourself up to have a system to maintain the same polarity of your magnets consistently. Now, this mainly works for, say, Space Marines or various other factions in the game where you want to keep your polarities the same and consistent across the army. And I genuinely think you want to try and do that anyway, no matter what army you're magnetizing. So how to go about doing this is when you go to the next magnetizing step of when you're wanting to magnetize your next miniature, always use the previously magnetized pieces to help you along the way. So when you're determining the polarity of the magnets that you need to put into the shoulders of the Space Marine, for example, you want to use the arms that you previously magnetized by putting the new magnets attached to there and then pulling them off, as we kind of did in that first part of the video as well. And then you can put them into the new torso, so they're going to be the right way for all the other arms that you've magnetized. Then you're going to want to repeat the process, but in reverse. So you're going to want to put the magnets onto the torso, so you're able to get the right polarity for the arms. And so that way, all the arms that you're going to be magnetizing in the future, you're going to be wanting to have the same polarity. You can use them across multiple units, particularly with Space Marines. That's really going to come in clutch, and you're going to get a lot of use out of them as well. So we're actually going to see this in real time. We're going to jump back to the hobby desk, and we're going to do some additional sets of arms for our Deathwatch Lieutenant / Ancient as well.
All right, so now that we have gotten the basis of this Lieutenant / Ancient done for the Deathwatch, we're actually going to move into doing some of the more difficult areas that we actually want to magnetize for this miniature. So we've got the two primary arms you might see, or he could be even a Deathwatch Sergeant if you want him to, instead of a Lieutenant or an Ancient. We're going to leave the backpack blue tacked on for this one. Just going to move the arms off to the side as well for the ones that we have already completed. So I'm actually wanting to do a chainsword arm, but the chainsword I'm wanting to use has already been magnetized at the wrist. So we're actually going to magnetize the wrist as well as the shoulder. So I'm actually going to show you how to go about doing that. It's a very similar principle to what we've already done, and I'll show you that. Then I'm also wanting to do the banner for the Ancient. Now this is from the old company Command Squad box set. I know they've just done the Company Heroes box set as well, but this is an old banner that I've had sitting there, and I really want to do it for my Deathwatch. However, if you look at that, and I've got one previously, they actually sit pretty poorly, and they're actually very easy to break. So we're actually going to put a magnet into the spot underneath there, and we're actually going to put a magnet directly on top of the shaft of the banner, just so then it's in place. Then we're also going to magnetize the actual banner arm in as well. So we will start off with the chainsword first of all. So we have got the shoulder that we're going to need to do. So we're going to need one magnet on there just to get ready. We're also going to need another magnet on the other side for the banneret arm. For the Ancient, those are the first two magnets we're going to need. Then we're going to need an additional magnet for the chainsword arm, so we're just going to pop that on there. We'll pop the rest of the magnets over to the side because we shouldn't need any more than that for now. So we've got the shoulder, so we're just going to do the same process as we've done for the previous arms. So we're going to pop the hole in there, but when we get to this spot, we're also going to do the same thing. We're going to pop a hole and just mark it out roughly in the middle, so then we can come in with a smaller drill bit and just make that pilot hole, if you will, to use a woodworking term, so that we have got a hole for the larger drill bit to follow as well. So with those done on each end, what we're then going to do, we're going to grab our larger drill bit and we'll do the same thing. So we're just wanting to make sure that this is more of a centered hole, particularly on the wrist. Doesn't matter so much on the shoulder pad because there's a lot of surface area, but with the wrist there isn't a lot of leeway up and down, left and right. So you really want to make sure that this is on the center. You're holding it nice and steady as you are drilling it, and you want to make sure that when you do drill it, that it goes nice and deep as well into the actual arm, so that we're able to actually countersink the magnet properly. That's deep enough there, and we're just going to tidy that one up pretty much straight away. Then we're going to come back. We're going to do the same thing on the top shoulder. And sometimes the torque, you'll need a little bit more torque than it will allow you sometimes to cut through plastic. But that was pretty much one fell swoop. Just going to tidy up the shoulder pad a little bit here. And you can see both of those holes are ready to go. So we're going to start off with the actual shoulder joint. I'm going to grab that one, put some super glue on it. There we go. All right. Now that we've got that one done, going to pop that in. Now, the good thing about using a blade over, say, a pair of tweezers or something like that, even if they are magnetic tweezers, is that you could see when we were doing that one, that when the blade was close, it actually pulled it out from being too deep. And that's a good thing to have in your disposal when you are wanting to magnetize, because then you can actually course correct as you're gluing magnets in without actually having to, you know, drill it out or do any other fixing methods to actually getting it right. So there we go. We've got that one nicely countersunk, and we're going to wipe off the excess off there. Stays dry pretty quickly, but now you can see we can pop that on. And even though that one's still drying, we can pop the chainsaw on there and pull it off, and it's, you know, it's staying there. So that's good to go. Next step, again, we're just going to do the shoulder pad, just a quick check to make sure that that is going to fit. And sometimes with the Deathwatch ones, you might need to finagle it a little because they do have that top ridge, and I keep on dropping it, as you will see. And it's just getting in the right spot for the arm itself. So sometimes you might just need to pop the backpack off. Grab a small bit of blue tack once again, as we've already done. Pop it on the arm. And then pop the shoulder pad in where it's going to sit. Then you pop that on. You might find that you need to sit it down a little bit further. Like so. And then slot that on there. And you'll see it sits reasonably well. Of course, with the blue tack not in there, it should be fine. And then you're sitting in like that. And so you could have a sergeant there that looks like that with the chainsword, instead of having the Xenophase blade if you wanted to as well, or a lieutenant. So we're then going to grab that shoulder pad, get the blue tack out of it, and then just glue that one in place. It actually is not a problem, and this is the good thing about gluing the shoulder pad in place with the backpack just blue tack there. So you're able to actually get it into the right position where it will fit with other various weapons as well. So that's all good to go there. And so we're going to pull that off ever so gently, but we might have to do it with the backpack off just until it's glued, and then we can pop that one on relatively easily. Now we get up to probably the harder one of the two that we're going to work on here, and that is going to be the banner arm. So we're going to start off with actually doing the countersunk magnet into the actual banner here. And I don't have a lot of leeway to actually create this hole because of how far up it is. And it's going to be the same with actually doing the pilot hole here as well. So we're just going to be able to get a small one. However, the good thing is with the drill bits, more often than not, some of these will actually have a lot of length on them. And so we'll actually be able to get it so tight at the top that it won't actually fall out. And they're long enough that we can sit all the way back down here and still drill the hole in the right spot where we're wanting it to, without actually having it compromise any other part of the miniature. Now, I am going a bit slower for this one, and I'm not taking as much out when I do it. but slowly and surely I am going to be getting that hole, and you can see it down there. That hole is making a good start. And so now that we've got a solid start there, once it grabs, it will start to really take, but we don't want it to necessarily grab. It's also a lot harder to manage a drill bit at this length from the actual pin vise itself. So if you can, it's always best to be as close as possible to the actual area that you're drilling. Of course, with the banner, because we want it in such a spot, it's going to be harder to actually control it if we were any closer. And so by doing it this way, we just want to make sure we're not coming through the other side. Now, because this is the only banner we're going to be doing with this magnet, it doesn't matter as much on the polarity. We just need to make sure that when we do it, we have the polarities the right way. And so that is why we're doing the, what do you call it? The hole first, rather than doing the arm. All right, so I've just had a little bit of an issue with the pipette on my super glue. Now, normally use the pipettes as best you can. Don't do this if you can avoid it. But if you need to, you just do very carefully, small amount. And then from there, what we can do, just grab it through the hole. And there we go. Perfect. That is in there nice and easily. So the next part is we're going to grab another magnet, and we're going to use the actual magnet we just put in to set the polarity of it. So that's in there now. With our second knife, we're going to come in and we're just going to pull it off, make sure that that's the way it wants to go. And ever so gently, with the more open end, we're going to pop the super glue on. Now, here's where things get tricky. We've got the super glue on there now, but we also need to get the actual magnet off. Otherwise, we're going to sit there holding it the entire time, which is not what we want. And so, and it's going to follow. So sometimes you might have to get in there with your finger and just kind of slide it as well as grab it to hold it. You don't really want to be doing that if you can avoid it. Just because one, it's super glue. Two, it could stick to your finger like it's potentially done to me, which I've been able to recover. And three, you really want to try and get it in the right spot. So by looks, that is tacked on pretty easily. And so now I got to put it in. It'll stay on there. And it is glued up pretty well, which is good. What we'll also do is we'll just do a little bit of super glue around the sides of it too, just so then that is all ready to go. So now we're just going to magnetize the arm. We're going to do the same process as we've been doing for all the other arms. I'm going to hit it with the drill bit. So as you can see, magnetizing is not a process to really be afraid of. It's something that can save you a lot of money if you're willing to do it. Sure, you might need additional shoulder pads for Marines, for example, but it'll allow you to actually get the most value for money out of your kits if you are able to do so. And, you know, if you're working with a tighter budget for the hobby, you know, maybe spending $20 on magnets over spending, you know, $100 on the exact same kit again just to have different options is likely going to be the way you want to go. Now, there are some downsides when it comes to magnetizing. It is a bit of extra work before you do any priming of your models, whilst also, you know, having to get those extra shoulder pads and getting the magnets. It does take time and resources to get as well. So you now got the banner shoulder magnetized, so we can probably just make sure that that is more fully stuck in. And there we go. So we've got that banner arm. We'll double check that shoulder pad there, which it can fit in. It'll just take a little bit, so it's probably going to be the least used one. And then we can make sure that the banner is going to stand. Now, that is the only downside that I did not foresee with this, is that the banner, because it's a heavy arm, is going to move around a lot. So that's something that you might want to put on, you know, say a 40mm base instead of the 32s, just so then, you know, you're not copying that issue. Because over time, you know, magnets do wane in their strength. So that's something I will fix up, but, you know, as we can finish off that arm, nonetheless, what you could even do is just get another crossbeam, magnetize it, do paper instead because of the plastic weight. The other downside is that, you know, you could stuff up the polarity, and that is probably the biggest thing you want to avoid. You do not want to have your polarity get mixed up, because if you mix up your polarities, you have lost an arm and a magnet. Or you could salvage the magnet, but you're going to end up ruining the arm. So that is just something that you'll need to bear in mind as well. So now that we've got the shoulder on there, shoulder pad, can we have it in such a way that it's not going to move? Quite possibly, but it is quite weighty. So we'll need to figure that out. Otherwise, that banner is just going to continually droop, which is fine. So we'll fix that arm at some point. We might come up with another way to, you know, maybe we do it this guy on a 40mm base, and so the banner will actually stay up when it gets down, or we put a rock or something that it connects to. But there is that. It's, you know, that's done. We've got a bunch of other pieces that we're wanting to do here, but for the basics, really, that's all we're going to go through. Obviously, we're going to, now that we've done the majority, we've still got some other arms, so we won't glue the backpack on for now. But you have got a Deathwatch veteran or a lieutenant or an ancient that we're going to use this guy as, pretty much ready to go for undercoating and painting. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, well, there you have it. That is basically the magnetizing process that I follow. Now, this process does work best when every single model across the army is of the same style. So Space Marines, it works really well with. You can do it with Tau Empire battle suits, Imperial Guard tanks, a lot of units where you're going to have consistently the same thing. So for Imperial Guard, for example, Lehman Russ is going to be really handy to magnetize the main guns or your sponsons and stuff as well. So you can swap those weapons out in the future. Same with Tau Empire battlesuit weapons. Some of the bigger suits you might not want to do once you pick their main gun, but their secondary guns you might want to change up. Things like that. So
it's really going to be great, a great technique and a great tool. However, we're not actually done for the video, because you're actually going to want to understand the pros and cons of magnetizing. And it's really going to be up to you as a hobbyist whether you want to actually assess if magnetizing your miniatures is the right choice. Because whilst there is all the pros of being able to fully utilize the kits, being able to get as much value for money out of your purchases from Games Workshop or any other miniatures companies, because you can use magnetizing literally with anything that is able to be magnetized. But it's also going to allow you to have a few cons as well. So depending on how many models you're looking to magnetize, you might be looking at doing more work than you'll actually get benefit from. If they are more spindly, they might have a lot of variety, or there's a couple of models in there that can only have particular weapons. So say, for example, take the new Termagants from Tyranids. There's a couple of different special weapons in there for the Termagants, but it might be a bit harder to figure out how to magnetize them with the ball and socket joints that they use rather than the flat faces of a Space Marine arm. So that's something you need to bear in mind, whether it's going to be worth the work to put into magnetizing something like that, or any models that might not have the greatest contact points, the greatest areas where you can put the magnets in and such. So you really need to keep that in mind with those units. So for example, I decided not to magnetize my Necron Warriors because, one, they're relatively cheap to pick up secondhand or in the starter sets previously. But two, the area in the shoulders where you attach the Gorse weapons into really didn't allow for magnetizing too well. I would have had to have magnetized the front of the torso as well as the arms to come out. So it just would have been a bit messy. So I decided, no, we're going to just not, and we'll just buy a bunch of warriors. Now, the other part of it is you also need to be prepared to paint the additional pieces that you do magnetize, which could mean that, you know, when you're wanting to change their loadouts, you're going to have to do additional painting for that unit. You might also have to source additional shoulder pads for Space Marines, for example, so you're able to actually have shoulder pads on the magnetized arms if you do run out of shoulder pads, things like that, and then more undercoating of the actual magnetized pieces and figuring out how to do that. If, you know, for example, the way I do it, I've got those spare Space Marines that I've magnetized the shoulders and the back on. If you've got some of those, you can use those for undercoating as well, which I do for my magnetized pieces. So things like that you've got to bear in mind. Now, the magnets themselves do cost money, and you can go through a lot of them over time, especially when you're doing multiple magnet locations on, say, a Marine. I've done Sternguard veterans before, where I've gone between 6 to 8 2mm by 1mm magnets for just one miniature. So that is something to keep in mind, is how much magnetizing you're wanting to do on your models. Say something like Tau battle suits, you're going to go through multiple different magnets for all the different suit slots for where they can have their weapons on there, or battle support systems and things like that as well. So whilst there are a lot of pros when it comes to magnetizing, saving money, you know, you're not spending as much to get those new models to actually have all the different loadouts that you want. You've got just the ability to utilize the entire kit, and for, you know, maybe an extra 20 Australian dollars, 30 Australian dollars for a whole heap of magnets, where over time you're going to go through them across multiple kits. You've got to really weigh up those benefits in terms of, okay, am I wanting to paint all these additional pieces? Or, you know, you could take my method where I only paint up the pieces that I'm needing for my current army, and then the rest I've just, when I need to magnetize them, I put them together and I can use them. So you can really go about magnetizing a couple of different ways, but it's worthwhile to weigh up the pros and cons before you do jump into magnetizing to begin with. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be it for our installment in our From Sprue to Tabletop series for Magnetizing 101. I hope this was a great video for you guys, that you're able to take away a really solid process on magnetizing miniatures, that you're going to understand the ways that you can keep your polarities consistent across your army, as well as the pros and cons of when you're wanting to do magnetizing, the tools you're going to need, all the stuff when it comes to it as well. Now, I want to thank everyone who has watched this video and did enjoy the video. Make sure to leave a comment down below. If you did like it, feel free to drop a like. And if you want to catch more of our content here at the ATWN, feel free to drop a subscription on the channel. Turn on that notification bell for free, and you can be notified as to when we are releasing more content, whether it's tournament coverage, more videos in this series, or a whole bunch of other content we're going to be releasing during 2024 as well and into the future. And if you do want to catch us live when we're doing tournament coverage or hobbying sessions, feel free to come and find us over at Australis TWN over on Twitch. Drop us a follow there. Make sure to turn on that notification too, so you're notified as to when we start up the streams. So you're going to be able to catch us live. You can ask questions in there where I'm doing hobbying, or we might have tournament coverage going with our teams across the southeastern seaboard of the country. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.